All right, so I should be live now on my channel. It has been a while since I actually went live on here. Shout out to Zach Miller for helping me make the whole setup. As you can see, my studio is my couch. I'm in my living room. I'm just so happen to be on my laptop, and we are live. So I'm going to be doing a live response to a video by Dark Matter 2525. He made a video the other day basically saying, I was going to say implying, but it's basically saying, not just implying, the typical uh, narrative that the Genesis stories, they come from other religions, they come from other stories that predated. Therefore, the authors of the Torah or the Tanakh or the Ketuvim or Nevim, right? They stole these stories from other nations. They stole them. I know not one scholar who would actually phrase it that way or put it that way for particular reasons, but I definitely want to respond to this and give a fleshed out, detailed response because that is a common misconception that the Genesis authors they took this narrative from another narrative and they stole it. That's just not how writings in the ancient world were. That's not how things worked in the ancient world. Um, and I know a lot of people are going to see that video. So without further ado, I'm just going to play the video. I'm going to give my response. And as somebody who studies this stuff for a living, I mean, I wake up in the morning and I mean, I'm studying ancient texts, ancient Egypt, ancient Israel. I find it fascinating. And as somebody who is in academia, who sits at the table with the academics, I'm writing a paper next month. Or actually, this month is March. This month, which I will be submitting to Oxford Theological Journal. So I want to give a fleshed out response to this video. And so without further ado, I'm going to let it play. All right.
Stealing, both against my commandments.
So, you want to get hired before summer ends?
And
The hottest tech companies are desperate.
I'm sorry, God.
Too late for that. Death is the cutoff to apologize. For some reason.
So when are you going to apologize, God?
What are you talking about now, Jeffrey? Apologize for what?
For doing the exact same thing Jimmy did.
What? I never plagiarized anybody.
No?
Nope.
Oh, really?
Yahweh, I'd like to talk to you about your report that you handed in last Friday about what you did over the last millennium. I believe you titled it Genesis.
Yeah, what about it?
Now, did you really flood the entire world exactly as it says in your Genesis report?
Of course. Exactly as I wrote it, it happened.
Yahweh, have you ever read the Epic of Gilgamesh?
No. Why?
Well, hundreds of years before you wrote Genesis, some of the older gods wrote a school play called The Epic of Gilgamesh. And in their story, the gods got upset with mankind, so they decided to flood the entire world, same as you. But before they did, one of the gods warned a very righteous man to build a boat to save himself and his family and all the animals. Sound familiar? The righteous man complained about it, same as your story, but eventually agreed. The boat had specific dimensions with many compartments inside, one door, at least one window, and the outside of it was coated in pitch, same as your story. Now, the entire world was flooded with a deluge, and the boat finally came to rest on a mountain approximately 300 miles from the mountain in your story. The righteous man released birds to find land, including a dove, a raven, same as your story. And after they did, the righteous man sacrificed animals and was then blessed, same as your story. A promise is even made to never flood the world again. Now, Yahweh, their story was written way before your story. Are you going to tell me your wet and wild Genesis tale wasn't lifted directly from them? Now, let's hear it. What's your defense?
So the thing is, in ancient Near Eastern literature, it is very common for one meta narrative to build off of another meta narrative or another mythos, not because they're stealing, but because they are competing against one another. So it's not that the author of the Genesis flood is stealing from the Epic of Gilgamesh. It is that the Israelites have their version of the story, the Mesopotamians have their version of the story, the Sumerians have their version of the story, people in Japan have their version of the story. Nobody is stealing from anybody. This is what's called, it is a polemic. It is a political attack against another nation and their deity and their God. It is to say, your God is not the God that caused all of these things to happen. It was really my God. My God is the one who flooded the earth. My God is the one who shut the door of the ark. My God is the God who made the waters recede on the earth. So they're arguing from this event from what's called common memory. And obviously, we know people remember things differently, obviously. So the way how the Israelites are framing the story in the Genesis narrative, they're framing it in a very academic, a very scholarly argument. Um, so it's not that the Genesis writers or that God is stealing from these other nations. No, 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 no. These other nations, they're interacting with each other. So you know how we go on Facebook and we interact with one another. We comment on each other's posts and we correct one another, right? And we say, no, 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 I don't really remember it this way. This is how I remember it. Or even if you look at, for example, like Rush Hour, my daddy is so amazing. He was scratched with panda claws. Oh yeah, well my daddy caught a bullet with his teeth, right? So imagine people going back and forth about whose daddy is greater. My daddy is greater because of this. My daddy is greater because of that. And in trying to accumulate the myth of these fathers, right? There's some mytho-thematic element added to the story so it can present itself to be more authoritative. So what the Genesis narrative is doing from Genesis 1 to 11 is it is putting Yahweh in this authoritative position as a king and as a god, so that when people open up the pages of the Torah, they then can come to the conclusion that, oh wait, you're trying to say that it was really your God who did all of these things. And me, as a Babylonian or as a Sumerian or as a Mesopotamian, I would automatically understand what you would be trying to say. It wasn't your God that flooded the world. It was really my God. It's a polemic. It's not stealing. It's an argument. And you get on YouTube or you get around these YouTube scholars, and they just aren't really privy to the ancient Near Eastern literature. They don't understand what's trying to be communicated. And so inevitably we have videos like this that present the literature and the narrative in a very modern way. So I'm going to continue playing the video.
Um, No.
Yahweh, this story isn't even worth stealing. It's rife with all kinds of logistical problems. It's not even a practical way for an omnipotent being to behave, let alone a supposedly benevolent one.
Well, how do you know they didn't steal it?
Well, in fact, they did. They got in trouble for stealing that story from some of the other students who came before them.
Really?
Yes, indeed. And even those students stole it from some of the other students before them. So you see,
Nobody in the ancient world got in trouble for writing a polemic against another creation mythos or flood mythos narrative. It's nothing to get in trouble about because they're not stealing, they are arguing with each other. They are throwing ancient Near Eastern shots at one another. It is not stealing, once again.
it's very old, way older than your story.
So, how do you know it didn't really happen?
Well, it most likely did happen.
Really?
Yes, but not like in your Genesis account. It was most likely a local flood that happened on the floodplain of the Tigris and Euphrates. Some farmer probably became a local legend after saving his family and a bunch of his animals. The story became a tradition and was told over and over again and embellished and romanticized and embellished some more until other cultures inherited it, as cultures tend to do with such stories. And then finally, it landed in your lap.
So I would agree with the video that this was a local flood. You if you read the text with ancient Near Eastern lens, even when you look at the phrasing in the Genesis account, where it reads in the Bible, all the earth, that can be translated as Kolarets, right? Kolarets is the whole earth, right? Or all the earth. But you also have another phrase in the text called Kol Basar, which is all flesh. Now, Kolarets and Kol Basar, they don't mean what American Westerns think they mean when they read that in their Bible. Kolarets in ancient Near Eastern literature, that just means all of the land. That doesn't mean the totality of the entire planet or the globe. Remember, the Israelites around this time didn't even know that the earth was a globe. People didn't know the earth was a globe. People believed the earth was flat. And when you look at Kol Basar, all flesh, that doesn't mean all flesh. If you go to Joel 2:26, it talks about how in the last days God will pour out his spirit upon Kol Basar, upon all flesh. Now, is every single person in the entire world going to get the Holy Spirit? Are atheists going to have the Spirit of God in the last days? No. There's that is a case where Kol Basar doesn't mean the totality of every single walking human being on the planet, let alone, like I said, Israelites didn't even know that the planet was a ball or was a sphere. They only knew about, in this particular story, the Mesopotamian plain that they lived on. Everything as far as the eye could see. So, um, like I said, nobody got in trouble for this. This is how people wrote in the ancient world. And nobody is denying that it was a local flood. Even if you look at the text, if you look at the Hebrew, you would get a local deluge from the narrative if you looked at it from its original ancient Near Eastern content or context. You would never come to the conclusion that it was a flood that flooded the entire planet. Ancient Israelites didn't know about the entire planet as we know today. You think Noah's flood was about North America, South America, and Australia? They didn't know these places existed. So, it seems to me that maybe the person who made this video, maybe they're very used to dealing with fundamentalists, but they're not used to dealing with the ancient Near Eastern literature as a whole in proper context. And that's something they definitely will need to work on. Even if you read the text in its original ancient lens, you would never come to the conclusion that it was a global flood anyway. That interpretation of the Genesis narrative came later in the 1900s with people like Ellen White and George McCready Price. In 19, I think it was 1945, he came out with a book called The Genesis Flood, and that's when the global flood narrative began to really take off. But yeah, obviously, duh, the biblical account of the flood, it's a local flood. You would never get anything else from that. So it's really interesting to me how this person is purporting that the biblical view of the flood was a global flood, as if the local flood view wasn't a part of the worldview of the ancient Israelites anyway. They would have believed it was a local flood anyway. So the way how this guy is like putting this spin on the ancient narrative is very uninformed. This seems like a very uninformed person who doesn't know how the scholarship and how the academic work is done.
Now, the geological record clearly indicates that all the floods of the world happened at different times, and that there was never any one time when water covered the entire earth.
Yeah, nobody nobody is denying that. And the biblical narrative isn't denying that either, being that these people thought the entire world at that time was all of what their eyes could see. To those people, that was the entire earth. That was Coloretz. Nobody is denying that.
Um, it's metaphorical.
A metaphor for what exactly?
Um, i- i- it's a lesson to not mess with me or I'll destroy everything.
In your story, you promised to never do it again.
Um, it teaches people to trust in my plan.
In your story, you regretted making man in the first place, and your flood solution fails and evil persists anyway.
Okay, can I make a few edits?
Afraid not? You already turned it in.
So we get down to the nitty gritty of the video, and we have Kid Yahweh trying to now give meaning to the narrative. It teaches a lesson. It's supposed to teach people not to mess with me as God. So what really comes into play here is lay people understanding the genre of the Noachic flood narrative account. Um, I think the person who made this video, I think they may have grew up fundamentalists, and it is very common for fundamentalists to not understand the genre of ancient Near Eastern literature and to look at all A&E literature as historic. The Genesis narrative is a blend between history and meta narrative. It's mythos. It's ancient Near Eastern mythos. And nobody would deny that. And as a Christian, I wouldn't deny that either. But what I will say um, is really telling how it seems like this person is trying to put this spin that the meaning of the story therefore invalidates the truths that the story are trying to communicate. It's kind of like he's putting a false dichotomy before his audience as if to say this story is either all historical or is just all fictitious. And that's just not how ancient Near Eastern literature works at all. It's not like one or the other, the way how we think of it. A story could be mythos and communicate spiritual truths about God just like in the parables of Jesus. Was there really a rich man and a man named Lazarus who went down to hell? No. It is a story that teaches truths about God, about spiritual realities in the world that we can't see. So, in that same mindset, there's no problem with a story like Noah's flood being meta narrative, and being that is meta narrative, it teaches us meta truths. It teaches us truths beyond the world that we can see, things about God, things about ourselves, and things about the supernatural world around us that the Israelites would have believed in. So it's really interesting to me how this person kind of pivots to a false dichotomy, as if to say that just because the story is not historical, therefore it also must not, or it cannot give us uh metaphysical truths about the world or about God. Um that's very, very telling to me. And I would also say it's either very dishonest, or the person who made this video is just very, very misinformed. And it is a shame that hundreds of thousands of people are going to see that video and also become misinformed, because when you dig into the ancient or Eastern literature, you're never really presented with, well, is this all historical or is this myth? It's not really one or the other. It's usually a lot deeper than that, because the stories in the East, the theology in the East, they're not trying to make the same points that we're trying to make, or connect the same dots that we're trying to connect here in the West. um, I also would like to point out that a very important part of the story in the Genesis narrative is the Anunnaki, or the Nephilim, who come from the heavens. So that's another big part in the story and the reason for the flood in the first place, which this person coincidentally leaves out. So this is just all very telling and very interesting. And I know this person might think this is a very clever video, but from an academic perspective, this is not as clever as they may think. And they may want to go back to the drawing board and look at the material from an ancient or Eastern perspective, because it seemed like they missed a lot of connecting dots.
Try the new milk.
So the video kind of stops there, and they go into like this long like diatribe of other stuff. But point in case, the biblical narrative of the flood, nobody is arguing, at least in ancient or Eastern scholarship, nobody is arguing that that is exactly how the actual flood happened. If you're familiar with the literature actually espouses that this is a theological spinoff of other creation texts or other flood narratives, because it's a polemic. It's not trying to give you history. It's trying to give you theological arguments for the God of Israel. That's what it's trying to do. The flood narrative in the Bible is not trying to give you history. It is giving you theology. So a lot of people, maybe they're just unaware. I know a lot of people don't know how ancient or Eastern literature works, but I figured I'd just make a video responding to that. But with that being said, I am going to make some more video responses to other atheist quips and videos, and shed some light on these things. I'm not even just speaking on these things as a Christian, as somebody who is about to be in the field and be a published scholar. Um, these things are just very telling to me, and people find out some bits and pieces of information on the internet, and they jump to certain conclusions that scholars in the field don't jump to for certain reasons. And hopefully people watch this video and they get a better understanding of what the biblical narrative is trying to do, the genre of the Noah account narrative in the Bible, and they get a better feel for how ancient Near Eastern literature works. So I'm going to log off here. I'm going to end this broadcast, and you guys leave a comment below in the next video you want me to talk about, and we'll go from there.